Excellent, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Kaplan, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm chair of the Ashland Climate Action Project, which is one of many projects from Southern Oregon, Climate Action Now, which is a really fabulous organization that is basically the leading voice for climate action from Southern Oregon, both here locally as well as very, very involved in state regulatory and legislative activities. And really, I think if it weren't for SOCAN, Southern Oregon wouldn't really have a strong voice in the state the way it does now. Also, SOCAN does many educational programs about climate science. They're truly a science-based organization. And I feel very deeply grateful to be affiliated with SOCAN. So I chair the Ashland Climate Action Project, which just basically focuses on, Ashland related issues. But obviously tonight's program is, definitely a regional issue. So I'm glad we have people from all over the Valley here tonight. Before we get started, I like to do a land acknowledgement. This program is being held in the ancestral lands of the Shasta, Takelma, Latgawa, and other Native peoples. We're grateful to the elders and their people who cared for these lands. We acknowledge that Native people still live here and we honor their sovereignty. We're thankful for these lands and the plants and animals that inhabit them and the water that flows through it. The SOCAN Ashland Climate Action Project is a community-based, completely volunteer-run, as is SOCAN. We provide education and information on local climate action, and we're guided by the framework of Ashland's 2017 Climate and Energy Action Plan, which is really a landmark document that sets goals for Ashland to achieve over the next decades. And we really believe in this plan, and we're working with the city to make sure that it's fully implemented. Tonight, we're always kind of experimenting with how best to do these programs. And I think because of the topic and the importance of food to all of our lives and our local growers, I'd like to open up when we go to questions. We're going to let you ask your own live questions without moderation, if you like. And I know you'll be respectful with time. But if you prefer, you can also type a question in a chat and we can handle it that way. So either way, but I think this is a time of gratitude this time of year, and the time when we take stock of our blessings and the good things in life. And I know for me here in the Rogue Valley, the incredible fresh food that we get to eat is a big part of one of the things that I am very, very deeply grateful for. Program is being recorded. We'll share the link following the program, and after a few days, it'll go up on the SOCAN YouTube channel. So future people, hi future people, you can watch this there. I also want to mention that in addition to SOCAN, there are many great organizations working in the Valley to support and enhance access to healthy and sustainably grown food in our local area. Lots and lots of growers and lots of organizations playing different roles in the Valley. We want to recognize several organizations tonight who helped us spread the word about this program. So if you're from one of these organizations, please raise your hand or wave. And if anybody wants to clap for them or anything, feel free to do that. So we want to thank Emerging Futures, Our Family Farms, Rogue Valley Farm to School, Rogue Valley Food Systems Network, Rotary Club of Ashland, Sustainability at Southern Oregon University, and Southern Oregon Food Solutions. So I hope you'll show your appreciation to these fine organizations at this time of giving. Lastly, my last housekeeping announcement, I want to thank SOCAN and my colleagues at the Ashland Climate Action Project for their support in developing this and our other Zoom programs. So that's, and if you want to wave, my team members, Louise Shawkat, Linda Peterson-Adams, Joanne Eggers, Kathy Conway, and my best friend, partner, and technical assistant, Bob Kaplan, without whom it would be very difficult for me to get through these programs. And he sits right here to my left. So sometimes that turns into something a little bit comic. But hopefully not too comic. Okay, So that's those are my introductions. So welcome everyone. If you want to just see the folks on that are on our panel tonight, you could go to speaker view and they will be highlighted. So first, we're going to start out with just introducing our three panelists, and we're so grateful you could be here at this busy time of year. They're each going to just tell us a little bit about themselves and their work here in the Valley, and then we'll go into some questions and field your questions as well. So I'm going to start with Maude Mccrory Powell. She's Associate Professor of Practice in OSU's Extension Small Farms program. And she and her husband also have a farm in the Little Applegate. So Maude, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight and happy solstice. I love this time of year. I wear a few different hats. First and foremost, my husband and I, as Lori mentioned, own and operate Wolf Gulch Farm, which we bought in 1998. We're out in the Little Applegate Valley and we are certified organic. We grow about 3 acres. We have 180 acres and it's actually a woodland resource. So it's not agricultural land, but we've turned it into a farm. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program. We started off, as many farmers do, by growing mixed vegetables, selling to farmers markets, and then getting into CSA, the community supported agriculture model of marketing. And we, for 15 years, ran the Siskiyou Sustainable Cooperative, which was the largest CSA in the Rogue Valley, which Josh was also a part of for most of that time. And then we gradually started growing more and more seed crops. Southern Oregon is an excellent region for growing specialty crop seeds, specifically flower and vegetable seeds. And so seeds actually require less water. And we have kind of marginal water to begin with. So we've been more and more moving our operation towards seed and away from produce. So last year was the last year we grew produce. We ended our winter CSA last season and are now just growing exclusively seed. So we grow on contract for about six different seed companies around the country. So additionally, I work, as Lori mentioned, for Oregon State University in the Small Farms program. I've been there since 2006, and I only work part-time, and there's so much work to be done. I primarily work with beginning farmers, so people that are interested, some young people, some older people that are getting into a second or third career, have bought some property and want to earn some income, or really have a vocation to grow food and steward property. And then I do work somewhat with commercial growers as well, but my primary focus has really been with beginning farmers. And then I sit on the board of our family farms, as well as the Rogue Valley Food System Network, of which I've been the president for the last 3 years. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. It's a very difficult topic, so I appreciate you all, being present to it, because it's, the climate change is really difficult, and especially how it is impacting farmers and food systems. It's painful, it's frightening, and it takes courage to be here. So I'm grateful for you all.
Thank you, Maude. Josh?
Yeah, hi. So I own and operate Barking Moon Farm. Been in business for 16 years now, and the farm is located in the lower Applegate Valley. And I grow certified organic mixed vegetables for fresh market and sell mostly within a bullseye of 38 miles around the farm. Mostly through farmers markets and CSA, and I do some direct to retail. And that kind of ebbs and flows a little bit each year, just like all facets of my business. I'm currently producing on about 4 acres, but depending on the year or how the land leases are going, it could be as many as 12.
Great, thanks, Josh. Kathy, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kathy O'Leary, and my husband and I own Valley View Orchard in Ashland, also Long Walk Vineyard in Ashland on the same property. And Well, we've been coming to the Rogue Valley ever since college in the late 70s, early 80s, but we purchased property in 2000, and that was this Valley View Orchard. It's a 50-acre property, of which about 35 acres are orchard crops and 10 acres are vineyard. And it didn't have a vineyard when we came. We planted the vineyard in the early 2000s, and those grapes that we sold for many years are now grapes we use to make wine and sell that wine through our tasting room on site. The orchard trees have been here for a very long time on our property. Some of them, this property was planted to orchard around the year 1900, a little earlier, in fact. And it was originally pears and cherries, lots of cherries. And in about the 19th, 3 generations of the Wagner family owned and operated the property. And then in the 1960s and 70s, it was planted to a whole number of crops, with the plan being to offer retail crops to local buyers. And they planted, we have 28 different varieties of tree fruit, cherries, apricots, peaches, pears, apples, and of course, wine grapes. And originally when we bought the property, there was a U-pick operating on it. That may come again, but during the pandemic, it's been a CSA and an order online pickup situation. And that's it. I will tell you that in 2000, when I came to the property, I had no farming experience. So it's been a journey for us, but a wonderful one. I'm an engineer by education, and just working with all the professionals in the Rogue Valley has been a tremendous and wonderfully satisfying experience. All the customers, all the bug experts, all the tree experts. Right now, you'd say that our business is partly commercial fruit. We sell our larger commercial crops, which are basically pears. They get packed by an organic packer and sold across the country. Our retail fruit crops get sold primarily locally. And then, of course, we have wine, which is sold primarily locally, but we have wine club members all over the country as well. Great. So we're trying to make a go of it in these hard times.
That's great. Well, I hope you're very successful.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to start the first question with Josh. And as I said at the beginning of the program, for those of you who are joining late, we will be taking live questions so we can all be part of this conversation. So if you want to ask a question, you raise your little hand icon, see if we can show how to do that. Of course, I can't do it right now. Oh, here we go. I'm going to raise my hand. No, it won't let me do that. I can't do it, but somebody else can. It says reactions. I can go like that. I shouldn't be doing this right now. Anyway, so Josh, tell us about your perception of farming this summer versus your previous summers.
Lots there. A lot of changing variables this year for me, not just ones that we're all experiencing, but things in my personal life have changed quite a bit. And I lost my field manager of 3 years. I knew this was coming, but it's been a pretty big transition for me, where I was mostly overseeing kind of the production on the farm. I went from that straight into what my son calls the dirty work of farming, and which has been really great. It's been fun to reconnect with all the on the ground in the field stuff, but it means I'm doing my job plus somebody else's job. And on top of that, a big shift this year as well has been just on a good year or normal year, labor is very difficult for me to come by on the farm. And this year it seemed near impossible to get people to show up or to find anybody. So beyond having to do those 2 jobs, it's taking on a 3rd job of kind of being a staff member or two as well. So rather than try to fight that, I pared down my production quite a bit to about half of what it was this last year. I also, with the housing market being what it is, the real estate market, one of my newly acquired leased lands didn't sell, but the owners were approached to sell, were approached to have their place purchased for a pretty exciting price. And so they decided that they wanted to put their house on the market. And so a lot of things have shifted my business around, and each one of those factors has a great influence on what we can do on the farm. So that was one thing specific to me, but then, you know, there's COVID and climate change, like we're talking about. And not only longer, warmer, sustained winters that aren't killing off bugs and disease and things like that, but also we're not getting the snow loads and the rainfall that we need, or that I'm used to experiencing, the weather that I'm used to experiencing here. It's been a lot warmer and it's gotten a lot drier. And so a lot of my farming takes place on the shoulders of the season. I only farm in summer because I have to keep my employees going, but I really enjoy the fall, the winter, and the spring farming. And to aid in doing that, I use season extension tools like greenhouses, and I'm having to kind of relearn how to use some of these tools at certain times of the year, because where they've been perfect, or I've learned the whole suite of crops to grow each month in these greenhouses, it's now too hot in those greenhouses at certain times in the spring for plants to survive. And so I either need to choose different crops or need to start modifying the greenhouses so that they can increase airflow and lower temperature, things like that. Markets have been a little bit different, you know, with COVID, and, you know, I'm trying to think, like, what was our fire season like this year? Did we have much of one? I'm totally preoccupied with everything else that's been happening this year.
Yes, there was lots of smoke.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of August, and I'd say half of September.
Okay, I think, yeah, okay, so that's coming back to me. So, I mean, that has a huge factor. One, in production, when we don't get the enough sunlight for our crops. It seems to be more cumulative. When we start to reach like the 2 to 4 week mark, I can start to see see things getting altered. Greenhouse starts where we need to use shade cloth in the prop house to raise our little starts to keep them cooler. That, in concert with the smoke, really creates leggy, kind of pale starts. Red lettuces look like a peaked green, and so lots. I'm reveling in this time of year. It's a busy time of year for me, but it seems to be usually a pretty stable time of year. Crops are in the ground, and we're just basically harvesting right now, and it's been a mild winter. I know we've had a couple cold frosts, but yeah, on one hand, really enjoyable, and on one hand, completely terrifying. Looking forward to next year. So,
Maude, tell me your thoughts about the trajectory over time, that changes that you've seen, or, you know, how you experienced last summer versus the summers before, the growing seasons.
Well, I'll start by talking about our farm in particular. in particular. So we bought our farm, like I said, in 98, and we had just gone through kind of a wet cycle. And so there was quite a bit of water in our creek. We have the only water right on Wolf Gulch, which sounds great, but it's actually not saying a lot because it's an intermittent creek and there's not a huge amount of flow. And then really quickly, I don't know if you all remember, but 2001 was an incredibly dry year. I think we got about 8 inches of rain that year. Back into a drought cycle. We had built catchment ponds to store water in from the creek, from a diversion off of our creek. And the ponds dried up that summer in 2001, and then the ponds cracked. And so they were useless. And so we didn't farm for the next year. I had my son that year, and my husband was running an irrigation business. Ponds, which was a big investment if we were going to be able to keep farming. So we did that. And then we whole irrigation system to be, really using as little water as possible. So we switched all to drip tape. So all 3 of the acres that we grow on are completely in drip tape. Like all good organic farmers, we were building topsoil, which would increase the water holding capacity in our soil by increasing the soil organic matter. We're using cover crops and adding compost and using a plow that would create these deep furrows in the beds, which would hold water longer up on the landscape. So we were really, very, very mindful of water. And so we've had a few rougher years where the rainfall wasn't as great. One year we actually weren't able to do our winter CSA. But we felt really good about the fact that we were able to grow so much produce without a lot of water. We felt like, that was something we were proud of. We were seen as somewhat of a model, especially in the permaculture community, which is really focused on dryland farming. And then what we saw happen in the last 5 years is that where our historic average of rainfall in the Little Applegate is about 21, we had 15 to 18 a year instead, and then higher temperatures. So while none of those years was as bad as 2001, we were just seeing this trend to drier and hotter until finally last year, our creek completely dried out. So then we were just completely reliant on the ponds and the winter catchment. Again, we had lower than average rainfall. So we would start off the beginning of the year with less in the ponds. And then this year, we had that heat dome, which was terrifying. I'm sure you all remember it. In the Applegate, we had 5 days of over 100 in a row. We had 3 weeks of over 95-degree temperatures. This was in late June and early July. So my thought was, if this is June, what the heck is August going to be like? It was a dark time. And on our farm, at that point, we'd been there for 23 years, and Tom looked at me one day and said, I don't think we can farm here anymore. And we were, we're completely committed to this land. We raised our kids there. I gave birth to my son there. I mean, planted trees, all the things, built community. And it's been devastating. So we're hoping to stay in our community, preferably in the Little Applegate, but we need to find a property with more water. So, in some ways, we started off with not a lot of water. And so the writing was on the wall in a sense, but on the other hand, we've done everything we possibly can to conserve water and use every drop, with rainwater catchment off of all of our roofs. And as I said, all these practices that would increase soil holding capacity of water. Specifically, that heat dome came when a lot of our dry seeded crops were flowering. So our lettuce seed, our onion seed, we had a mustard called komatsuna. They were all flowering at that time. And once the temperature is above 90 degrees, it inhibits seed formation in those flowers. So we had lower yields, and the seed that we did grow had lower germination rates. And then, as Josh alluded to, our wet seeded crops, so like the tomatoes and the tomatillas and the peppers, they all are, ripening in August. And we had everything was about 2 weeks behind because of that smoke that we had that Josh conveniently forgot. Lucky Josh, in August. So we kind of got it on both ends, that heat dome with the dry seeded crops, and then the wet seeded crops suffering with this by the smoke. And yeah, and Josh mentioned as well, I don't think the temperatures dropped below 20 in the last 5 years. So we are seeing more insect predation with less of that die off that would typically happen with the colder temperatures. So yeah, it's been really difficult on a very personal level. And then in terms of working at OSU Extension, definitely seeing, individual farmers who are moving to the Willamette Valley and elsewhere in search of just better climate in general. Some folks looking at the coast as well, some looking at the Midwest. And then I would just say, and I haven't this would be more anecdotal or impressionistic, but my sense is that there are less people interested in farming. So I mentioned it used to be, I'd get calls practically every week from someone that, their dream was to start a farm. And obviously, many of those people are weeded out or lose interest or, don't have necessarily the follow through, but I'm just seeing less and less of those calls. We run a season-long beginning farmer training, and there was a lot more attrition this year, I think, as the heat dome happened and then the smoke. The sense is that it's this is not as friendly a place to grow as it has been in the past. So that's my impression of 21, which is wish I had happier things to say, but that would be what I would share.
Thank you, Maude. It's hard to, I think we feel this in our hearts, what you shared and what Josh shared. And I know we'll be talking about some solutions or some positive, ideas as we go forward. But I think it's really good to kind of lay it all out here on the table and maybe feel like what I feel also is we are here together. That there's a very supportive community. And I think, as you said earlier, Maude, it's good for us to know what's going on. That's why we're here. And even though it's a challenging topic and it brings up a lot of fear for us. Kathy, can you share a little bit your perspective? Because you've been here you've been doing this for about 20 years here. You've been at your orchard. So, and some of those trees you mentioned are 100 years old and they've been through a lot ostensibly, but so as a fruit tree person and a vintner, talk about your perspectives.
Well, it's, I have to tell you, it's all over the map depending on the topic. If we want to talk about the air quality and the smoke, it didn't affect our tree crops or our vines as much as it could have. But that's probably related to our site, which is very much a southern facing hill with a lot of airflow, so much airflow that we don't need any machine to chill or to get proper air circulation amongst the crops. So we have a good news thing in that we have limited effect of smoke and we have limited effect of some of the other things that travel by air and linger like frost, but also some disease pressure we have an advantage for. On the other hand, with the smog or with the smoke, we needed to all wear ventilators when we were working in the orchard because our work is outside and it's up on ladders and it's affected absolutely by the quality of air for our employees. Where it regards water, again, I have a very strange, perhaps not the same situation. We have an irrigation canal across the whole top of our property. And in the old days, when the irrigation canal was built in the 1920s or so, the way that they irrigated our orchard was to open about 10 gates and flood down the hill, that entire hill, something that would not be, practical or desirable, obviously now. But I will tell you that when the drought happened and we were suddenly faced with the waters going off in 2 weeks, we found a way to fill and use drainage canals to water as much as we could before it was turned off. And that old infrastructure was what we began to take advantage of. Unfortunately, our neighbor also did the same, who has cow and pasture. And that ended up flooding us from that side of the property, which isn't good for orchard trees. And so now we had a drainage issue of trying to move his water off our property while trying to get the water to the upper hill where we couldn't get enough water to it. The net result was that we ended up not harvesting our Bosc pears this year, except for a few rows at the bottom where they were able to get more water because they were at the bottom of the hill, so they were able to achieve the size we needed. But we left hanging crop for the first time since I've been here in 2000. And part of that reason also was more regional in that what happened with the drought was that all the fruit came in small. So California, who harvests before us, had small fruit. They filled all of the packing houses and all of the storage facilities with small fruit. And then when we came to harvest, it was, oh, there's no room for you unless it's big. It was that kind of a thing. Whereas in the past, we've been able to sell all of our crop one way or another. The heat dome was a bit devastating for us in that we experienced what they did up in Washington State, where the fruit looks really nice when it comes off the tree and you expect it to last about 3 weeks, and then suddenly it is mush. It just sort of self-disintegrated, and it literally became, went from apricots to apricot, jelly, if you will, right in the boxes, right in the boxes in a cold room. You'd open the box and it would be done, which was really, really sad. It happened to cherries and it happened to apricots, which were the crops that were in play during the heat dome. So we had that to deal with. I will tell you, with our grapes, we got a lucky break with that because we have been dry farming them for the most part since we planted them. They take very little water in a normal season, so it did not really affect us to have the irrigation turn off. But we lost probably in the neighborhood of 100 small fruit trees that were, 5 years old or less, because we couldn't keep enough water on them. We had to hand water them. We couldn't keep enough water on them once the canal was no longer available. So a rough year all around, basically. Oops.
So,
Sorry.
I'm not a farmer and I'm going to ask a dumb question, I think. So, so you said that the grapevines were really okay. So do you see, so then looking forward, do you see that as being a more, the region being a lot more promising for grapes? Or I think it's also changing the kind of varietals that will do well here. How do you talk a little bit about grapes and wine?
Yes. So yes, there are lots of parts of the world that dry farm grapes, just like there's lots of parts that dry farm, for example, peaches or tomatoes. Lots of crops have been raised to expect a minimal amount of water. And so for our grapes, they were not looking like we were not watering them. They were looking great. And that basically means they've achieved a very deep root system, and that they've found a way to survive in the water that does not happen during a normal year, if that makes sense. The varietals that we can grow, yes, the hotter, drier season will allow us to grow varietals that are used to a hotter situation. But in general, our climate is right along that belt that you would hope to find in France and Italy and Croatia and Turkey. All those varietals that grow in all those places can grow in where we are. And really, the difference between your southern exposure and the northern exposure and east and west can make all the difference in what varietals you grow. So yeah, it's a promising world for grapes. It's not a promising world for pears. I'll tell you, pears are mostly water, and they're a good size and they take a lot of water, and they like to be wet the whole season, and they like a very cold winter. So all those things together don't sound like where we're heading,
And that really was kind of an identity for the Rogue Valley of being home of the pears, right?
Right.
So I did.
Well,
see
there's a reason why tree
Yeah, go
fruit
ahead.
like that, the palm fruit, like apples and pears, when we think about those crops, where do we think of them as growing? It's, northern Michigan, northern New York, it's Canada, it's Maine, it's all these places that have a very cold winter. And that is what we're moving away from in the Rogue Valley.
So was there anything else other than grapes that did well under the circumstances? Of last
The old
summer?
trees did fine. They
The
seem
old
to have the same deep-rooted resistance that helped them through probably 100 years of other situations. The trees that did not do great were the ones that were, like I said, 5 years old or less. We needed to water them, and I have 10,000 trees, so we needed to water them by hand. And we rigged up a number of ways to do that, including, taking totes of 300 gallons and rigging a way for it to slowly water a whole row, and ways to use our sprayer as a watering truck. We also catch about 10,000 gallons off our roof that we use for water, primarily for spraying in the off season. But we used everything we had basically to try, and we worked, every day with 3 people watering those trees during the worst of it. And the worst of it for us was once the irrigation canal was turned off, because it got turned off. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was like late July, I think, even. And we harvest crops into October. So we had a long time of heat to keep young trees alive and to try to get size in our pairs.
Tremendous amount of work out there watering
was.
annually.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kathy, are you on Medford Irrigation District then?
No, TID.
And you were cut off that late? I thought
We were cut off that early.
I thought they were cut off earlier. You had water till July from TID?
Yes, we had water into July. Yeah, but not into September and not into,
Yeah.
and it also started quite late.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing I'll talk about water just briefly,
Yeah.
because one of the things that happened with our watering system with TID was that, the cycle of water was adjusted to deliver in a way that TID thought would be very useful for most farmers. In that it was a 2-week cycle and then 2 weeks off and a 2-week cycle. But for us, we are not set up to water our orchard trees that way. Our orchard trees are run on a series of 8 hand lines that get moved every morning. So when you cut it off for 2 weeks, the trees that don't get watered were the trees that haven't been watered for 2 weeks already, if that makes sense. So the whole thing required us to try to adjust, to try to deal with the 2-week shutoff part of their system. And I understand that, not to get into this part of the water world in our area, but I understand that there was some water thievery going on in the TID system, which was one of the reasons they were shutting it down, especially our pressure line, which we also have access to for some of our fields. But that turned out to be a problem for us as well, because we basically this sounds terrible, but we basically during the season water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some part of our orchard. It's not everything, obviously, but because we work with hand lines, you water a row and you come back, 4 weeks later to get that same row again, or 3 weeks later. Our grapes are on a drip system, and we do have a few impact or inline sprinklers in the ground, but for the most part, we move pipes every day to water the trees. That's the legacy of a very old orchard. And just to kind of put it in perspective, we never invested in putting those sprinklers in the ground because the orchard rows are very old and wide. They're planted in a configuration you would have planted in the early part of the century, which makes for a beautiful place to be, but not an efficient watering situation.
Wow, thank you, Kathy. Josh, talk a little bit about your water situation. What are you doing out there?
So I live and do some of my production about halfway up Thompson Creek, and at the base of Thompson Creek along Highway 238 in the Applegate River, I lease a few fields right along the river there where I do most of my production. Thompson Creek is historically a pretty dry watershed. And while I'm completely in love with where I live, it's the limitation to farming. It has good soils, but it really is the water. So early on in my business, I realized, one, I was outgrowing the footprint of the production area with my business. And even before that, I started to outgrow the water availability. And so rather than try to force things to work and grow things with water that I didn't have up here, I started leasing land. I sought out where all the water was and where the good soils were and the lower elevations and the more open aspect. Basically went to agricultural land rather than what I would call like a mountain meadow. So far, I know everybody gets a little nervous with water each year, even other folks that are on some of the ditches or straight on the Applegate River. It's been my experience that they regulate the dam quite well for us farmers in the Applegate. And I have yet to feel like we're gonna run out of water. Although this year I spent a lot more time with my family up at the lake recreating than I have in the past. And it was quite a sight to watch that lake go from not even that full to really down to like just a couple, like basically a little river in the center of it. So my place at Thompson Creek, it basically goes dry when I would want the water most. Why I bought the place, though, it has both a surface water right off Thompson Creek and also has a separate groundwater right, which is essentially a spring-fed pond at the bottom of the property that coincides with the creek level. So the surface water is used to water my upland property, and the groundwater right is used to water my production area where I have my greenhouses. And little by little, as I've leased more land on the Applegate and didn't need to use the full footprint of my production area on Thompson Creek, I've learned that, okay, we can take advantage of rain in the spring, and as the creek level drops, so does the recharge rate on my spring-fed pond, I guess, increases. It takes, when I pump water out of it, the pond takes longer to recharge later in the season. And so I've learned what I can and can't do. This year I added a slightly new piece of battery equipment in the form of just a small black poly tank. And what that allowed me to do was, because when I'm watering, I need a fair amount of water in a fairly short amount of time. And so I was able, throughout this summer, where my pond that I irrigate out of, it was really just like a little puddle almost. I was able to each day slowly pump water from that into the poly tank, and then so kind of constantly pumping water very slowly out of the pond into this tank, and then I could, in one irrigation set, dump that water where it needed to be in my production area. So that's kind of interesting. I've been talking to folks at NRCS about there's some grant money available to do some water-wise irrigation improvements. And some of the things that I'm thinking of is our irrigation ditch out of Thompson Creek is just that. It's an open ditch. It's in really bad repair. And I'd like to work with the maybe dozen or so landowners on my ditch, if we can get like a ditch-wide multi-grant project going to pipe the entire ditch so that we won't have the water loss. And then also my pond, the groundwater right, is spec'd to be, that pond is spec'd to be quite a bit larger than it is. So I'm thinking about enlarging that pond quite a bit to create a larger battery and see what that does. And that's really about all I can do at my place. I've heard we're about halfway into a 25-year drought or something like that. So maybe we'll come out the other end of it a little better. But if those improvements don't help and things don't change for the better with climate, I'm already using a lot more drip tape at my water-wise or water conservation irrigation methods at my place than I have in the past. I'm open to just kind of completely moving my production to where the water is. And we'll hope that's where my other fields are down in the Applegate. So haven't really had any problems there. I use a lot of water down there. One thing that was kind of neat about this, or I guess a neat function of this year, was I really paid attention to how much water I was using, which I haven't in the past. Farming down along the river, the water just flows and you just take it, and I really haven't put too much thought into it. My place, I started to have to do calculations to figure out how much water I'd be able to use throughout the season, which then would dictate how much acreage I'd be able to produce on. And it's just really eye-opening. I really like to use overhead water. The crops, a lot of the crops that I grow really thrive on having that overhead water. It's not quite as good as real rain, but it's the next best thing for a lot of the things that I grow. It takes a lot of water to do that. A lot of it just ends up in the air, going to the neighbor's property, or maybe, you know, the atmosphere somewhere. So I was dumbfounded by how little water some of these water-wise methods, like using drip irrigation, use compared to the overhead. And I enjoy having to shift and change things. I like learning. Although a lot of times I don't seek out learning, I learn when I'm forced to learn. So, and I like that part of my job. It keeps it exciting and keeps me on edge. And interesting to hear, I think you say, Maude, that folks are moving up to the Willamette where the water might be a little more reliable. This year, I just did some real estate searching up in Washington and British Columbia, thinking like, who'd want to live up there? But I bet there's a lot of water, and boy, it's really expensive up there, and probably for good reason. So I love where we live here in the Rogue Valley, and I'm determined to make things work down here. Maybe I'll just start growing cactus.
That's great. Well, no, you got to keep growing carrots, Josh, because we love those carrots. I'm going to pivot just a little bit. Pam Marsh, Rep Marsh, who we love, is here tonight, and I've been interacting with her a little bit. And she's agreed to come on and talk a little bit about the drought relief, I think it's called, legislation that was dealt with in the legislative session last week. So Pam, I think we're going to try to spotlight you to get you on here as a panelist.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. But really, thanks to Maude and Kathy and Josh. It's very sobering and it's inspiring. And as Candace noted in the comments, it really provokes us provokes tremendous admiration for the efforts that you continue to engage in, because we understand how critical what you are doing is to us, our survival here in the Rogue Valley. You are our food sources. I was thinking about, as I was listening to, I was thinking about my Christmas tree. I have a little Christmas tree in my house that my son cut from our land up in the Green Springs, sort of the land up where the source of the Talent Irrigation District comes from. And that tree was fresh cut and went from his truck to my living room and immediately just started dripping needles. There are needles, if you touch that tree, there are needles falling to the ground. And this is a tree that is so beset by drought. And you can see it in every day when I'm sweeping up after that Christmas tree, which had contained apparently no water resources from the moment that it left the land. This is really reflective, obviously, of what we all know is happening, and people on this call in particular know, which is that our climate is changing. I've owned land up in the Green Springs since 1994, and we've seen the snowpack go away, and we've seen the rain diminish, and we've seen turbulent storms, and we've seen most recently the wildfire situation, which it's front and center. And those of us who live in these more rural parts of the state see that. So what we are trying to do in the legislature is first act on climate from a mitigation point of view. But that's a long-term play, right? It's going to take years for us to start to get to that point where we're starting to turn the carbon curve, if we are able to do that. And in the meantime, we are trying to figure out how we can help farmers first recover from these really bad moments, and secondly, adapt on the long term. So in the special session that we held last week, the legislature approved about $100 million to go to drought relief, a number of different packages. Klamath Basin got some very specific regional support. But of that money, about 40 million is in forgivable loans to farmers who took crop losses during the past year. And of that 40 million, 1.5 million is dedicated to a small farmer relief fund. And I want to call that out because it was really Maude and Maude's comrades in the Applegate that started this conversation. We met way back last summer when the heat dome was making this situation obviously critical, and talked about what we might do. And there is a program in California that's a small farmer relief program. And we said, we need one of these in Oregon. And there was an effort then among the folks in the Applegate to reach out to others across the state. And the small farmers really stepped up, put together the construct for a fund, and we got $1.5 million to start that. Now, that's not a lot of money, but it's seed money to what I hope will be an ongoing effort to collect government and philanthropic funds to support farmers when we have these significant moments, because climate change is happening. And we hope every year won't be significant drought, but we know that some years will. And certainly we are on a long-term trajectory toward much less rain, much less snow. So I think that fund, again, though, it's not a ton of money. It's really evidence that we can make our case, we can tell the story, and there is support out there once the right people know what's happening and know how to support the efforts that are happening locally. Other things in the drought package include support for our irrigation districts, some money in there to look at to provide technical assistance for small farmers who want to apply for some of the federal funding that may be out there. There's also research monies helping us to try to identify crop-resistant strategies drought-resistant strategies or more drought-resistant crops. Because although we can relieve the problems that we've experienced this year, perhaps with some money, we can't. The conditions are changing, and we're going to have to look at every strategy possible in order to provide the supports that farmers need to figure out how to negotiate this new world as it continues to change. So there is efforts afoot, and we're just, I think the bottom line is just what all of you have been saying, is that we are going to have to figure out how to do things differently. And that over time, that's going to require much more than $100 million, although that seemed like a lot of money to pass out, because we are going to have to rebuild our irrigation systems. We're going to have to invest in water in a way that we've never had to invest before. And it's going to be extremely expensive, but there is no alternative to doing that. So if any, I guess I would just close by saying our irrigation districts in the Rogue Valley are really crucial to supporting a lot of our farming community. If any of you live on those irrigation districts and are interested in getting involved in the politics of water, I suggest you think about running for the boards of those irrigation districts, because we need to make sure that they are really, really engaging in modernization and moving us forward and acquiring the investments and the planning resources necessary to be able to support the farming community in the future.
Thank you, Pam. Can you think of anything else that you'd like to urge your fellow residents to think about or consider? Or that's a great thing that we should, running for the irrigation districts, not something I'd ever thought about, but for those of people who really care about these issues, can you think of any other ways that they can get engaged?
Well, this is all part of this big cycle of change that we're seeing with climate change, and there are SOCAN and the Ashland climate effort is all about what can we do to try to bend that curve.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of water, I think what we're really looking at is years of big investment, again, to make sure that we have the infrastructure that will support farmers, and whether that's a large irrigation district like the Talent Irrigation District, or whether it's, as Josh noted, the users on his section of a district. When Maude and I first spoke this summer, we were really talking about those small projects in the Applegate and how a Greater Applegate, which is the community organization that's out there that has really brought people together around a variety of issues like this, might be supportive in helping people to just understand what is even possible out there. So I think, certainly supporting those efforts is going to be critical, and recognizing that our relationship with water is not going to be the same in the future within even the more urban parts of the region. Is really.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate all the work that you've done, Rep. Marsh, to bring this to fruition. Does anyone, I know you can't stay too long here. Would you entertain a question if someone had a question for you?
Sure. If there's a question, I can answer.
Panelists, does anybody, or Maude, you were participating in this process with Rep. Marsh. Do you have anything you want to?
I just want to say thank you so much, Representative Marsh. You've been such a champion for us.
Well, it's you all who are the inspiring people, because you're the people on the ground actually figuring out how to do all this.
Yeah, but you're the one in Salem. That's inspiring.
If we can support that, then we should.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And yeah, just to explain too, there are federal drought relief packages for farmers, but unfortunately, the small farmers just tends to be, we have this kind of industrial farming system since the 50s or 60s, and so really like small farms often do fall through the cracks. So this is really an effort to make sure there was some funding for people that were ineligible for the federal funds. And there is also an emphasis on BIPOC farms as well, which I feel passionately about as well. So yeah, but I just want to say thank you so much.
Well, I think it's really important that we recognize that this is, the role that our farmers play is really part of the long-term resilience of this community, right? As conditions change, having food sources nearby as part of our community is going to be critical to us. So figuring out how the greater community can support these efforts, and recognizing that there may be times where we really need to invest in our farmers in ways that we haven't done before if we want to keep them here. And I'm pretty sure we want to keep them here.
Yeah, we very much do. Pam, if you have a moment, there is a policy related question in the chat. about whether there is an avenue for farmers to earn revenue for doing carbon sequestration farming. Is that something that they talk about in Salem? Is that a thing there? I mean, I know it's a real thing, but is it a political thing too?
It's a discussion. I don't think we figured out how to manifest it yet.
Mhm. Okay.
I've also heard some interesting, this is a bigger conversation, but I heard some interesting from renewable energy developers discussion about whether farmland that no longer has water should have land use authority to move to hosting renewable energy development. I mean, that doesn't help support our farmers, but it might be in some places of the state, it might be a way for people who own land to still have value in that land.
Mhm.
I mean, I think we're just going to have to employ or at least vet every idea that comes forward.
Yeah, and there's another question about what qualifies as a small farm, and are large ranchers and conventional farmers open to switching to more drought-tolerant crops? That might be a Pam question, but it could be for other people as well.
I think I would like to hear others answer this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the USDA identifies small farms as anyone that is grossing less than $250,000 a year. So that's the definition according to USDA. And what would the second part of the question was?
Are large ranchers and conventional farmers open to switching to more drought-tolerant crops? Well, maybe we don't know that because they're not on the panel.
In some cases.
Yeah.
You know, through OSU, I helped organize and run a training in November for agricultural professionals on climate resiliency and working with farmers specifically, especially across the political spectrum, for which many, just the term climate change is a turnoff and they wouldn't want to work with extension. And, you know, a big part of the discussion was around this issue of resiliency and adaptability and around climate grief, which we talk about, you know, I'm sure you all talk about that quite a bit, but looking at the fact that we're going to have to shift how we look at agriculture. So just this idea that the Rogue Valley is a place where there are pear orchards everywhere, those are going to probably change and go away. We're already seeing that in a lot of cases. And so it really is about grieving what has been and what we see agriculture as and adapting to something new. So there's like this emotional component too. You think about like how in the Willamette Valley, there's like so much turf grass, and that's also going to start to change as well. So that's a piece of this, is that we need to embrace the fact that things are going to change, that agriculture is going to look different. And in some ways it may, you know, there are opportunities here as well. There's such an emphasis now on food security and food access. And so maybe we won't be, you know, growing these export crops quite as much. And there will be more local consumption of food. But I think that is a big component as well. For farmers as well. I mean, we have to grieve the way we farmed.
Mm-hmm. That's really a good pivot to a question that came in the chat earlier about how, in terms of our farming looking different, even in the past several years, how has hemp and pot production affected the ability to lease land for food production and water consumption? Has there been a shift from pears, grapes, food to pot? How can we help support local growers for local food production and distribution? I hear this a lot, people saying that they think everything is being converted to hemp and pot production, and that is very water intensive. I hear that. Does anybody have perspectives that they want to share about that topic?
I can share a little bit of my personal experience. So like I said, I do lease most of my production land, and I've been doing so for about 13 years. And little by little, the properties that I lease have been getting sold to folks that they want to either grow, you know, hemp or cannabis, something in that realm. And so I've been losing access to some of these properties. And luckily there's enough people around that appreciate what I do, and they're willing to host me as a farm tenant. but it sure is a lot of work to set a property up. In the case of this last one that I lost this year, just for a year, to put all the irrigation and fencing infrastructure up for 1 year. And usually I like to see 5 to 10 years out of that investment. So I don't know, we'll see too, as the price of land is definitely going up around here. Very curious, but I've been impacted in that way.
Does anybody else want to talk about hemp and weed? Your personal experiences with it? No, just kidding.
I mean, my experience talking to growers of both hemp and marijuana is, the markets are just so volatile that people are earning less and less money. And I think the more states that pass legalization, and assuming we see that at some point at a federal level, I think the markets are just not going to be the same. But there's been a huge impact. And I mean, Josh talked about labor earlier, and that's one of the biggest complaints I've heard is it's really hard to find. It was already hard to find good labor, and then it became increasingly hard, but it's, had a huge impact in a lot of different ways. And I've also heard, and again, this is like somewhat anecdotal, but that there have been, there's illegal use of water in cannabis grows. And Rep. Marsh might be able to speak a little bit to, I think it was Senate Bill 3000 that passed in June that allowed for more enforcement or gave funds for more enforcement. So, because I think that's been a big concern with water as well. And I know in the little Applegate where I live, there's a couple of cannabis grows that there's alleged, water stealing or piracy that's happening that's impacting folks lower down the river.
There's something else that I've seen. I mean, we're very impacted by the labor. We tend to lose our labor at a point where those industries require labor. So it's a fight right around the time Bartletts need to be harvested that people can earn more money in working for other people. But the thing that bothers me personally the most is that I see not too far from our farm, rows and rows of plastic sheeting being used as part of the growing process and then not being removed, but plowed under. And I don't know how many years you can do that before you've impacted the value of the soil to grow something else. But I don't believe the plastic that's in that sheeting is something that you want in the ground when you're growing organic crops. So it's, I don't know the answer to that. And like I said, that's just a personal thing where it bothers me every time I drive by it, but, but that's my view on that industry that's become so visibly present everywhere.
Yeah.
Lori, I can add just a little bit. Also, Maude referred to House Bill 3000, which we did pass in the long session in June. And that gave a little bit more teeth to local law enforcement to go after people who are running hemp and cannabis operations that are blatantly illegal. Also in the special session just passed, we allocated $25 million in a package that will support law enforcement, code compliance, and our water masters in this work. Clearly, people who are doing cannabis and hemp legally, and there are some of those, I think are largely not the problem here, although, probably there are some people who could use some instruction on their use of water. But we have hundreds, perhaps thousands of illegal operations that are out there, and that's become obvious over the last 6 months. So the money we put into law enforcement is to go after the people who are just blatantly illegal, didn't bother to get a permit or aren't growing anything that could be the law defines as hemp. Water masters will have additional personnel, not because water masters are law enforcement, and we don't want water masters with the responsibility for confronting people, but we do want them to have the ability to follow up on, in particular, on those people who are ostensibly legal, but need some guidance as to how they're doing water. We want to make sure that everybody's using water legally, and water masters need support, more support for doing that. And then there is an ongoing discussion that was also partially addressed by the $25 million package around worker relief, because we know a lot of the people who are on these hemp farms, we get reports of really horrific living conditions, little sanitation, sometimes kids present. So we know that those workers, once a site is busted, need some support for getting paperwork, getting back home, providing some emergency housing, that kind of thing. And then when I talk about the fact that we know that there are people who are using water either for illegal operations or using water illegally on legal operations, I always make a point of saying, but we have a drought. So our illegal diversion of water is not the reason my Christmas tree has no needles right now. It's because we are just not getting the rain and the snow pack that we need. And then when we see people using water in inappropriate ways, it's just the more infuriating, because we are part of a region that has persistent long-term drought. And the idea that this precious resource wouldn't be used for some productive reason by someone doing it legally is just sort of beyond contemplation, I think, a lot of the time. So we are putting money into this. We are hoping to get on top of it, but it probably will take a few years.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit more with our panelists. We've got about 15 more minutes. So thank you, Pam, for being on here. And if you need to go, we know you're working hard all the time. So thank you for being here. Kathy talked about the grapes doing well. Josh, since you're more of a vegetable man, what do you see? Are there crops that are actually doing well or under the conditions that you see, like, well, or talk about how you think about next season? That's a more broad question.
Yeah, most everything did well. I think the things that didn't do well this year were things that got eaten by squirrels. With the dry summers we're having, dry spring, summer, fall, winter that we're having, there's not a lot for some of the critters around us to eat. And so I put a big buffet out there for them, and of course they're going to go for it. And there's not too much in the way of like exclusionary fencing or anything that I could use for squirrels other than trapping, which has its limits. But as long as I have water, most everything's done really well. Like I said, I'm going to reevaluate which crops I put in the greenhouse this spring, at what point in the season, to try to minimize them overheating. And yeah, I don't like to change too many variables per season. I have sort of a guild of things that I really like to grow and know that my land grows well and I have markets for, and I leave a little room each year for experimentation. And so, the seed catalogs come out right about now for the next year, and I haven't allowed myself to open them up yet, because that means that has a loaded meaning when that starts to take place. But yeah, we'll see. I've joked for a couple years now that with all the greenhouses going up for hemp and cannabis, maybe all that industry will crash and all that land will be somewhat accessible with those greenhouses, and we can start planting our limes and lemons and avocados in there. So maybe that'll be the future of the Rogue Valley.
There's a man who's always innovating. Maude, tell me how you think about the future, and what are there positives that you see?
Let's see. well, I want to mention the Dry Farm Collective, which a colleague of mine, Amy Garrett, runs out of Corvallis. It's actually international at this point, and I'll put a link in the chat. But she's doing work on connecting dry farmers who are growing a lot of like melons and tomatoes, and Kathy mentioned some dry farming orchard crops as well. And they're now working. We're going to work with them a little bit on seed because they're focusing on selecting for drought tolerant resistance. So I mean, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities for collaboration, for folks working together. Josh, I don't know if you'd agree, but I mean, I think Southern Oregon is kind of known in the state for having a real community of farmers that work together, that there's just like a lot of cooperative enterprises. We have great nonprofits down here that support farmers. So I'm seeing more and more of that. I mentioned that I'm on the board of the Rogue Valley Food System Network. We just did our strategic planning this fall. And, you know, our number one priority is looking at drought in the next few years and climate change. So, you know, I see it as an opportunity to come together. It's hard to be really positive about it, but it's, you know, I think that's the future, is just more working together. And so I see that as an opportunity, I guess. I'm not really sure what else to say. And like Josh said, I mean, there is so much support in the community. When we kind of announced to our community that we were gonna have to sell our farm, we immediately had like several people come to us and say, you can lease our property, we want to retire, you can buy our property. We've been really grateful for that. So I think there, you know, people do value small farms and farms in general. And so that's been really nice to see. That's been a silver lining for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with climate change, it's, you know, we're all going to be pushed into just more interesting collaborations. I think it was Bill McKibben recently said, you know, we have the technology, but it's people, and we need a movement, you know, so I think we need to build these bridges between different communities in ways that perhaps we haven't done in the past. Kathy, what do you see going forward? You did talk about the grapes, but someone pointed out we can't just eat grapes and drink wine all the time.
Why not? I don't get that.
Yeah. Especially this time of night, right?
You know, I think for us, I think we're going to be working on a smaller footprint that we feel we can control better. And I think we've already been looking for replacement trees that are better suited. There's a lot of orchard crops that grow in more arid climates, and we are likely to be looking into some replanting with some of those varieties.
Can you mention what those are?
No, but we've had lots of jokes about the aloe farm and, you know, our cactus crop and, you know, things like that, you know. But no, there are quite a few, and you know, various kinds of figs, for example. One thing that's happened on our farm, which anybody who's been a customer for many years will recognize, is that we were always a pretty iffy apricot crop because the cold winter, you know, took the blossoms off when they bloomed in January, and, you know, misguided as they were into thinking that they could make it to spring. But we've had an apricot crop now the last 3 years. And that just goes to show you that the winters have been mild, and, you know, and maybe that is more of the crops that grew in Santa Clara Valley, for example, are going to be more suited for what will grow in Southern Oregon for going forward.
Yeah. Josh, are citrus crops drought tolerant? Kate Jackson asked that.
I don't know. I'm looking right now, and I have a lime tree and a lemon tree. They're in my living room right now. I bring them in for the winter. I'm just kind of watching them grow and fruit, and they're pretty neat. I think I want to expand on that a little bit just for my household, but who knows?
I don't think they'll be outside anytime soon. Yeah, no, we don't have the winter for citrus to successfully thrive as a commercial crop.
Okay. So let's talk just a little bit more, and then I'm going to open up the lines, and if anybody wants to unmute and just give thanks. or encouragement, or we have a lot of things in the chat. I don't know if everyone's looking at the chat, but just, really wowed by your resourcefulness. And Julie Green, we walk past fields and talent daily and are so grateful for the farms and farmers we see in all the seasons. We're gratefully aware that we eat because of what you do. Thank you. In the admiration of all our local farmers. So you're working so hard, but please know that, you are, you're on a pedestal for us that, we really, really appreciate, value what you do. So tell a little bit, just as in your closing comments, is there other ways that the community can support you? Obviously buying your products, supporting kind of programs that Rep Marsh was talking about, or just any kind of message that you'd like to give to the audience here on this topic that, is very concerning, but we're with you. We'd like to, we want to be supportive. So tell us, let's go around the circle and just tell how you would have us, what message you'd like to give to us. And I'll start with Maude. Sorry, maybe somebody else wants to start.
I'll try to think of something back.
Okay. Kathy or Josh? Anything we can do?
So I really think that the Rogue Valley is such a supportive community for folks like me who do what we do. It's no easy task, even in the best situation, to grow things. But I could just imagine, I couldn't imagine what it would be like to grow all this stuff and not have a home for it and a community to buy it from me. So yeah, I really just feel so supported every single week of the year by the Rogue Valley. You're doing great.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really nice, Josh. Well, let's open it up to anybody who wants to unmute, and we'll just see how that goes. That would just like to, add your voice. I'm going to I'll keep you pinned, but how's the best way to do this? If we're in gallery view, I can see everybody who's here. So anybody who would like to speak, to share appreciation or say anything.
I'd like to know if vertical farming has any place here in the Valley. They're doing a lot of that in Kentucky.
I don't know much about that. Can you speak a little more to it?
Well, everything's grown. My understanding is everything is grown inside vertically. That takes less water, and they taste good.
That's what you know. Okay, maybe an option for the future. Candace, did you want to say something?
I wanted to just thank everybody and my appreciation for you guys giving us the delicious food that we eat. I wanted to ask a question about processing plants or kitchens. Kathy, you talked about how, unfortunately, because of the heat, your fruit didn't last very long. It's hard for me to imagine that we won't have a hot summer again. Is it possible for you to take these small pears and these fruit and process them into jams or frozen fruit or something else? Are any of those facilities close enough and cost effective for that to be an alternative?
No, that's a great question. And I should tell you that we do have a commercial kitchen on site, and we do produce quite a lot of different products from the fruit that we can't sell fresh to customers. And that includes jams and sauces. It includes frozen fruit that people buy from us all year. It includes like cider and different juices as well. So we pretty much use everything that the trees produce, either fresh to consumers or into a product or into our freezer. And that has worked well, but with the apricots, literally they went from fresh fruit to compost without any opportunity to use them in another way.
It's heartbreaking.
Now, I'd like to think that we've learned something from that. And if the heat dome is coming, we'll pull them off underripe and try to process them that way. But we harvested them when we normally would harvest apricots, hard and yellow on the trees, not green, but not ripe, not soft. And they went from that to mush overnight.
So it sounds like labor for picking is one of the biggest issues, and maybe
Absolutely.
finding some way to give the farmers extra money to give people who choose food we can eat over other products to do that. Although it's very hard to set up a competition like that. Everybody needs whatever their thing is to be brought in. Anyway, thank you so much.
It's an interesting idea. It is. I mean, there are some of the larger growers for tree fruit, like let's say Nomis, as an example. When they hire somebody, they offer them a bonus at the end if they stay through the season. So that's the way you can kind of encourage people to continue and not leave when the hemp harvest starts. And so that's a way that, and it appeals to people. It's money talks, no question about it. We, for better or for worse, we have been successful at leveraging family relationships and community relationships amongst the people who do labor for us. And that has been wonderful for us, but when you have the same group of people coming out every year and they're all getting older every year and you're not seeing young people come into it, you ask yourself where that's going to go, especially for a crop that requires such intense individual labor to harvest.
We need like a big core of young college kids who will come and pick and consider that an adventure out there in the 100-degree heat.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's interesting. I have a good friend that's a contractor, and it's a similar issue for him in finding brand new people to get out and into his industry. And they've got various high school programs and other programs that encourage young people to give construction work a try, that kind of thing. Try being a carpenter for a week or two and see if this is your fit. I don't know of any such thing that sounds like that for local people in the Rogue Valley to work in an orchard. It's all imported labor or families that are, have been doing it for generations. So I'm not sure where that goes. I will tell you that I was really pleasantly surprised this summer. We in addition to the, harvesting fruit, many of you know we have an orchard store that is often staffed over the years by high school and college kids. And no difference this year, but this year it was very interesting. The people who applied were people from farm families, and they loved it. We had a great summer of, absolutely loving being out with the fruit, picking the fruit, packing the fruit, making things with the fruit. It was all a wonderful experience. And I'm talking about a 16 and a 17-year-old. So it was great.
They were nice too. As a member of your CSA, which we really enjoyed, all your fruit. I loved seeing them every time we went in. They were so friendly. And
there you go. I hope they're back next summer.
I hope so too. Yeah. And I saw Pam put in the chat an idea that I don't know if that's something that's been talked about before, but the need to establish an ongoing small farmer relief fund to help our farmers negotiate whatever comes forward. That's
can't be unhappy with that idea.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Any other final questions or words of encouragement or comments? Okay. Well, I want to thank our panelists tonight. A challenging topic, as we said, but we're here with you. I'm so glad to hear from Josh that you feel that support and that love, and that you have a community that you work with, and that makes a big difference. And it sounds like there's a lot of learning going on, which works for Josh. because he gets pushed and he has to learn some new things and he likes it. So I think we heard a lot of good things here today and obviously challenges. But I just want to thank everyone here. Tuesday, tomorrow is the Growers Market in Phoenix. Hope you'll be able to swing by there and frequent our folks there, celebrate the solstice, the magic of the season, and wishing you all the best for the holidays and look forward to seeing you in the next year. So thank you so much for all you do. We're in this together for the long haul. So thank you. And thank you to our sponsors. Thanks for Pam Marsh for showing up here. She does it. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
How do I